Have you ever wanted a place where you can learn, relax, and be entertained all at once? Well, you've just found it. Welcome to my channel, where every video is created with passion and creativity. Stick around, hit subscribe, and let's explore something amazing together.
I walked into my own living room and found every single person I loved sitting there, waiting for me. My wife, my brother, my 2 kids, my father-in-law. All of them lined up on the couch like they had rehearsed this, like they had planned it. And the moment I stepped through the door, briefcase still in my hand, tie still around my neck, the room went completely silent. My son stood up first. He's 23. I pay for his college. I coached his Little League team for 6 years. I taught him how to drive in an empty parking lot on a Sunday morning. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, sit down. We need to talk." I almost laughed. I thought someone had died. I thought there had been an accident. I set my briefcase down and said, "What's going on?" My wife Carol didn't look at me. She was staring at her hands, folded in her lap. My daughter Megan was scrolling her phone like she couldn't be bothered. My brother Ray was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, and he had this look on his face. Not guilt, not concern, just impatience. Like I was the one inconveniencing them. My son said, "Dad, we've talked it over. All of us. And we think it's best if you stopped making decisions for this family." I said, "What?" He kept going. His voice was steady, rehearsed. "You've been difficult, Dad. You've been controlling. Mom has been unhappy for a long time, and instead of listening, you just steamroll everyone. We think Uncle Ray should be the one we come to from now on. He understands us. He listens." I looked at my brother. Ray was 49 years old. He'd been divorced twice. He borrowed money from me 4 separate times and paid back none of it. And he was sitting in my house, in my living room, on the couch I bought, nodding along like this was the most reasonable thing he'd ever heard. I looked at Carol. She still wouldn't look at me. I said, "Carol, what is this?" She finally lifted her eyes. And what I saw there was not sadness. It was not guilt. It was something I hadn't seen before. Or maybe I had, and I just hadn't wanted to understand what it meant. It was relief. Like she had been waiting a long time for this moment. She said, "James, I think you should hear them out." I was 51 years old. I had spent 24 years building a construction engineering company from nothing. We had a 4-bedroom house in a good neighborhood. Our kids had never wanted for anything. I had never raised my hand to anyone in that house. I had never missed a mortgage payment, never walked out during an argument, never put myself before my family. And I was standing in my own living room being told I was no longer needed. I didn't say anything. I picked up my briefcase. I walked to the bedroom, closed the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to the sounds of the house, my wife breathing beside me, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the hallway floor, and I started going back through everything. Every late night, Carol had stayed at her office. Every weekend, Ray had come over just to help out. Every time I'd reached for my wife and she'd pulled away. I wasn't stupid. I had sensed something was off for months, but I had told myself it was work stress, midlife restlessness, the natural drift that happens in a long marriage. I had told myself a story because the real story was too ugly to look at directly. I got up at 3 in the morning and went to my home office. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, not to work, just to think. And that's when I noticed it. Carol's iPad, sitting on the corner of my desk where she must have left it earlier. The screen had gone dark, but it hadn't locked yet. I almost put it down. I almost walked away. But something made me tap the screen. It opened to her messages. The conversation at the top was with Ray. I won't describe everything I read. I'll just tell you that it had been going on for 14 months. I'll tell you that there were things in those messages that I could never unhear. Details that told me exactly how long I'd been the last person in my own life to know the truth. And I'll tell you that when I got to the bottom of the thread, the most recent message, sent just 2 hours earlier, was from Carol to my brother. And it said, he didn't blow up. I think he's in shock. Give it a few days. He'll fold. She thought I would fold. I put the iPad down exactly where I'd found it. I went back to bed. I lay there in the dark next to my wife, this woman I had loved for 25 years, and I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just made a decision. I was going to handle this correctly. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, said good morning to Carol like it was a normal Tuesday. She seemed surprised I was calm. She asked how I was feeling. I said I was fine, that I'd done some thinking, and that I appreciated the family being honest with me. She visibly relaxed. I could see her shoulders drop. I drove to work, but before I went to my office, I made a detour. I went to see my attorney. His name is Dennis, and he has been my business lawyer for 11 years. I sat across from him and I told him everything. The messages, the family meeting, all of it. Dennis is not a dramatic man. He listened without expression, took notes on a yellow legal pad, and when I finished, he looked at me and said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." The first thing Dennis told me was to document everything and touch nothing. Don't move money. Don't change passwords. Don't tip anyone off. The moment Carol or Ray suspected I knew, the situation would get complicated and expensive. He said the most powerful position I could be in was to let them believe they were in control while I quietly put everything in order. I asked him what everything meant exactly. He walked me through it. Our company, Merit Construction Engineering, was incorporated with me as a majority shareholder. Carol held a 15% stake that I had given her 5 years earlier as an anniversary gift, back when I thought such gestures mattered. Under current circumstances, that 15% was a liability. Dennis explained what needed to happen in the right legal sequence before any divorce filing was initiated. He also referred me to a private investigator named Sandra. Retired law enforcement, methodical, no nonsense. I met her that afternoon. Sandra didn't react to anything I told her. She asked questions, wrote things down, quoted me a flat fee, and said she would need 3 to 4 weeks. I told her to take the time she needed. I drove home that evening and had dinner with my family like nothing was wrong. Carol made pasta. Ray happened to be there, of course he was, and the 3 of us sat around the table and they talked about a vacation they were apparently planning. To the coast. In March. A family trip, Carol called it. I nodded and said it sounded nice. Ray looked at me the way a man looks at something he has already decided is no longer a threat. I smiled and asked him to pass the bread. The weeks that followed were some of the strangest of my life. I went to work every day. I came home every evening. I was courteous and calm and gave Carol no reason to believe anything had changed. Meanwhile, Dennis was quietly restructuring the ownership documents for Merit Construction, filing the kind of paperwork that takes months to unwind once it's in place. Sandra was doing her work on the outside. I also started keeping my own records. I bought a small voice recorder, the kind journalists use, and I carried it with me at all times. Not to trap anyone, just to protect myself. I had learned something that night reading those messages. I had been naive. I had trusted the people closest to me without ever verifying that trust was warranted. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. About 3 weeks in, Sandra came to see me in my office. She set a manila envelope on my desk and said, "It's thorough. Are you sure you want to see it?" I told her yes. Inside were photographs, dates, times, locations. There were also financial records she had obtained through legal channels, and what those records showed was something I had not expected. It wasn't just an affair. Ray had been using Carol to get information about Merit Construction. He had a connection to a competing firm, Larson Group, and over the past year, 3 of our major bids had been undercut by margins that were too precise to be coincidental. Someone had been feeding them our numbers. I sat very still for a long time after Sandra left. Then I called Dennis and told him we needed to add something to the plan. I won't walk you through every legal step, partly because it took another month, and partly because the details are dry. What I'll tell you is that by the time Dennis said we were ready, the situation looked like this. Merit Construction had been restructured in a way that was entirely above board and entirely devastating to anyone who thought they were going to walk away with a piece of it. Carol's 15% stake had been converted to a class of share that carried no voting rights and no liquidation value without board approval, a board that no longer included anyone named Carol. Ray had no formal stake in the company, but what he did have was a paper trail connecting him to the leak of proprietary bid information, which Dennis quietly turned over to our attorney's contact at the State Business Fraud Division. We also had the messages. Sandra had documented the communication between Carol and Ray in ways that would hold up. We had financial transfers, we had location data, we had everything. On a Thursday morning in November, I called my family together. I told Carol the night before that I wanted everyone over for dinner. I said I had been doing some thinking about what they'd raised at the family meeting, and I wanted to talk it through. She seemed pleased. She texted Ray before she even left the room. I watched her do it. They all came. My son, my daughter, Carol, Ray, and even my father-in-law, who had been conspicuously absent since the living room ambush. They sat around the dining room table looking comfortable, expectant like they were about to receive a concession. Dennis was in the next room. Sandra was parked outside. Two people I trusted completely, both present, both aware of every detail. I sat down at the head of the table. I looked at each of them. I looked at my son, who had stood up and told me I was no longer the head of my own family. I looked at my daughter, who had sat there scrolling her phone while it happened. I looked at my father-in-law, who had always claimed to respect me. I looked at my brother, who had borrowed money from me and repaid it with this. And I looked at my wife. I said, I want to start by saying that I'm not angry. I want you all to hear that clearly, because what I'm about to say isn't coming from a place of rage. It's coming from a place of clarity. Ray shifted in his seat. Carol's expression flickered slightly. I opened the folder I had brought to the table and I slid the first document across to Carol. It was the restructured shareholder agreement. I explained calmly and slowly what it meant. Then I slid a second document to Ray. It was a summary, prepared by Dennis, of the evidence connecting him to Larson Group and the bid disclosures. I told him that the full file had already been submitted to the State Fraud Division and that he should expect to be contacted. The room was completely silent. My son said, "Dad." I held up one hand and he stopped. I looked at Carol. I said, I know about the 14 months. I know about the messages. I know about the trip you were planning. I paused. I read the one where you said I would fold. Carol's face went white. I said, I didn't fold. I planned. I won't describe what happened next in detail. There was crying, there was raised voices. Ray stood up at one point and said something threatening, and I told him very calmly that Dennis was in the next room and had heard everything, and that adding a witness intimidation event to his existing legal exposure was probably not his best move. Ray sat back down. My father-in-law left without saying a word. I don't know if that was guilt or shame or just survival instinct. My daughter cried and said she hadn't known about Ray and the company. I believe her on that, though I'm still not certain. My son tried to apologize, and I told him I heard him and that we would talk separately when it was just the two of us because what he had done deserved a real conversation, not one surrounded by this. I asked everyone except Carol to leave. When it was just the two of us, I told her I had already spoken to Dennis about the divorce filing and that she would hear from him within the week. I told her the house would need to be listed, that the division of assets was already outlined in the paperwork, and that she was welcome to consult her own attorney before responding to any of it. I told her I wasn't going to make it ugly if she didn't. I told her I had loved her for 25 years and that I was genuinely sorry things had come to this. She asked me how long I had known. I told her. The night she left her iPad on my desk, she asked why I hadn't said anything. I said because I wanted to make sure that when I did, I had everything in order. I didn't want to react. I wanted to respond. She started to say something else and I stood up from the table. I told her I was going to stay with a friend for the next few days to give her space to process. I picked up my jacket, said goodnight, and walked out the door. My friend Marcus. We'd known each other since college. The one person I had confided in during those weeks of quiet preparation was parked at the end of the street. He had offered to be there, just in case I needed to leave quickly. That's the kind of person Marcus is. I got in his car and he said, "How'd it go?" I said it went the way it was supposed to. He drove, and I looked out the window at the neighborhood I had lived in for 16 years. The houses, the trees, the familiar curve of the road, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not satisfaction exactly. It was closer to stillness, like a long noise had finally stopped. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. It was not clean, but it was contained. Carol's attorneys pushed back on the shareholder restructuring, claiming it had been done in anticipation of divorce to deprive her of assets. Dennis had prepared for that argument. The restructuring had been done through entirely standard corporate governance procedures, all documented, all time-stamped. The court agreed. Ray was formally investigated by the State Business Fraud Division. I was told several months later, not by anyone official but through a colleague who knew someone, that he and Larson Group had reached a settlement that involved significant financial penalties and an agreement that effectively ended Ray's ability to work in the construction sector in this state. I don't know the details. I didn't ask. My son and I have had several conversations since then, long ones, difficult ones. He has apologized more than once, and I believe him when he says he didn't understand the full picture. That Carol had framed things to make me sound like the problem, and that he was young enough and close enough to her that he believed it. We are not where we were, but we are talking. That's something. My daughter and I are closer now than we were before any of this. She called me about 3 weeks after that dinner and said, "Dad, I'm sorry, I didn't know about Uncle Ray and the company. I went along with what Mom said and I shouldn't have." I told her I knew. We had dinner, just the two of us, and we talked for 3 hours. She's a good person. She just got pulled in the wrong direction by people she trusted. Marcus got me through the worst of it. I don't say that lightly. There were nights during those months of quiet preparation when the weight of it, knowing what I knew, sitting across from Carol at dinner, watching my brother in my house, almost cracked me. Marcus was the one I called at 10 at night when I needed to think out loud. He never told me what to do. He just listened and asked the right questions. That kind of person is worth more than I can express. Merit Construction is still operating. The company I built from one small office and a used pickup truck is still standing. We bid on a large municipal contract last spring and won it. The team is good. The work is honest. I go to the office every morning and I know that everything in those walls belongs to what I built, not to what I nearly lost. I'm not going to tell you this story has a tidy ending. My marriage of 25 years is over. My brother is someone I no longer speak to. There are holidays that are complicated now, family events that require careful navigation, relationships with my kids that are still being repaired. But I'll tell you this. The night I read those messages on Carol's iPad, I had two choices. I could have walked into the bedroom and exploded. I could have done what they were counting on me to do. Lose control, say things I couldn't take back, give them every reason to paint me as unstable and dangerous. That was the script they had written for me. The difficult husband, the man who couldn't be reasoned with, the one who needed to be managed. I chose not to play that role. I chose to be quiet and careful and methodical. I chose to walk into the situation with documentation instead of accusations, with attorneys instead of ultimatums, with facts instead of feelings. And when it was over, I walked out of my own house. The house I had paid for, maintained, and protected for 16 years, on my own terms, not because someone pushed me out, because I had finished what I needed to finish. Carol thought I would fold. I think about that sometimes, not with bitterness, more with a kind of wonder at how completely people can misread the person standing right in front of them. I never folded. I just waited until I was ready.